We've calculated the ROI on your neglect, my father said, sliding an invoice for $12 million across the table. Since our distance made you a genius, we're billing you for the intellectual property of your trauma. He wasn't joking. My parents were actually demanding a 50% cut of my net worth as a parenting fee. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I reached under my chair, pulled out a red folder, and placed it gently on top of their invoice. The silence that followed was deafening. Before I tell you what was in that red folder and why my mother screamed when she read it, drop a comment. If your family sent you a bill for raising you, would you pay it or burn it? Let me know where you're watching from. To understand the invoice, you have to understand the venue. 4 hours earlier, I was standing in the corner of a penthouse that costs $5 million. It was a sprawling, glass-walled fortress overlooking the city skyline, filled with people who equate net worth with moral character. The event was titled the Rebranding Gala. My sister, Mariah, was launching her comeback. 6 months ago, she had been indicted for selling online lifestyle courses that didn't exist. She had taken money from thousands of followers and delivered nothing but empty zip files. Most people would call that fraud. My parents called it a misunderstanding of vision. Tonight was their attempt to scrub the internet clean. They had invited influencers, minor celebrities, and anyone with a blue checkmark to witness Mariah's resilience. I was there, but I wasn't really there. I was the ghost in the machine. I wore a simple black dress that cost more than my mother's entire outfit. But because it didn't sparkle, they treated it like a uniform. My mother, Lisa, breezed past me with an empty champagne flute. She didn't look at my face. She just held the glass out, waiting for me to take it, refill, Gabrielle, and try to smile. You look like a funeral director. I took the glass. I didn't say anything. I walked to the bar, refilled it with vintage Dom Perignon, and handed it back. This was my role. I was the utility. I was the running water and the electricity essential. But only noticed when I stopped working. I watched my father, Charles, holding court near the balcony. He was telling a group of investors about his parenting philosophy. I drifted closer, blending into the curtains, listening to him rewrite history. We have 2 very different daughters, he said, swirling his scotch. Mariah is the sun. She needs to burn bright. That kind of energy requires resources, attention, and capital. It's an investment. One of the guests, a woman with too much filler in her lips, gestured toward me. And the other one, the quiet one, my father laughed. It wasn't a mean laugh. It was worse. It was a congratulatory laugh. Gabrielle. Oh, she's a different project. We realized early on that she didn't have Mariah's spark. So, we gave her the gift of solitude. We stepped back. We let her exist in the shadows. And look at her now. She's a... What is it? Lisa, a librarian. Archivist? My mother corrected. Joining the circle. She likes dusty old papers. It suits her. We curated that personality. You know, if we had coddled her like we did Mariah, she would have been overwhelmed. We gave her the space to be boring. It was a strategic decision. The guests nodded, impressed by this spin. My parents had turned their neglect into a design choice. They genuinely believed that by ignoring me for 29 years, they had architected my personality. I stood there, holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres, and I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger. anger is hot and messy. This was cold. It was the feeling of a balance sheet finally zeroing out. They were standing on Italian marble floors. They were drinking wine from a cellar that held 3,000 bottles. They were bragging about their rental of this magnificent apartment, telling people they had a generous benefactor who believed in Mariah's second chance. They had no idea that the benefactor was standing 5 feet away, holding a tray of crab cakes. They didn't know I bought the building 6 months ago through a shell company. They didn't know I was their landlord. They didn't know that every time they critiqued the decor, they were insulting my taste. I wasn't a librarian. I was the owner of the cage they were preening in. And as I watched my father take credit for my solitude, I realized something. The lease was up. Mariah had been pacing the room for an hour, scrolling on her phone, checking her engagement metrics. She looked like a shark that had run out of ocean. She needed a moment. She needed content. Gabrielle, she snapped, pointing at a dusty, leather-bound book sitting on the coffee table. Come here. I need you to do something. I walked over. The book was a prop. It was a copy of The Great Gatsby. But it looked old. The cover was faded. The corners were bent. It looked like something you'd find in a bargain bin at a thrift store. I found this at an estate sale this morning, Mariah announced, her voice pitching up into her influencer register. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to the room. She was talking to her followers. I think it's a first edition. Like a real one. From the 20s. She shoved the book into my hands. Authenticate it. Right now. Tell everyone how much of a genius I am for finding this. I looked down at the book. I didn't need to open it. I could tell from the binding alone. It was a reprint from the 50s. It was worth maybe $20 on a good day. I tried to be subtle. I leaned in close, keeping my voice low. Mariah, it's not a first edition. It's a book club edition. It's a reprint. She pulled back, her eyes narrowing. What did you say? It's a reprint, I whispered. Don't make a scene. Just put it away. Mariah laughed. It was a loud, brittle sound. She grabbed a microphone from the DJ stand. Did you hear that? Everyone, she announced, her voice booming through the speakers. My sister, the expert, says this is fake. She says I don't know what I'm looking at. The room went quiet. All eyes turned to us. My father looked up from his drink, annoyed. My mother adjusted her diamonds, looking bored. Gabrielle is just jealous. Mariah continued, prowling around me. She's always been jealous. She hates that I have an eye for value. She wants to keep me down. She wants to be the only smart one. She thrust the book back at me. Prove it. Prove it's fake. Show everyone right now why you think you're so much better than me. I stood there, the book heavy in my hands. I looked at my parents. They weren't stepping in. They were watching, waiting to see me humiliated. They wanted me to fail. They wanted Mariah to be right, even if it meant I was wrong. Go ahead. Gabrielle, my father called out. If you're such an expert, show us. Or are you just making things up to hurt your sister? That was it. That was the moment the last thread snapped. I didn't say a word. I walked over to the main console that controlled the room's audiovisuals. I pulled out my secure tablet. I connected it to the system. You want proof, I said into the silence. Okay, let's look at the database. I tapped the screen. The massive 80-inch monitor behind me flickered to life. I intended to pull up the archival database for 20th century literature. I was going to show them the publication markers. the copyright page, the paper quality. But I was angry. And when I'm angry, I'm efficient. I had been working on a transaction earlier that day, a major acquisition. I had left the tab open, and when the screen lit up, it didn't show The Great Gatsby. It showed my dashboard for Sotheby's. It showed a pending bid for a collection of medieval manuscripts. And in the top right corner, in bold, black numbers against a stark white background, it showed my account balance. Verified liquid assets, $24,800,000. The gasp that went through the room wasn't just audible. It was physical. It sucked the air out of the space. Mariah froze, the microphone dangling from her hand. My mother dropped her glass. It shattered on the marble floor. But no one looked down. They were all staring at the screen. They were staring at the number. 24 million. The antique shop lie dissolved in a single pixelated instant. I wasn't a dusty librarian scraping by. I wasn't a charity case. I turned to look at them. I expected to see shock. I expected to see confusion. But that's not what I saw. My father's face wasn't filled with pride. My mother's eyes weren't filled with awe. They looked at that number, and then they looked at me. And in their eyes, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. They looked at me like I had stolen it. From them. It was in that silence. In that heavy, suffocating pause, that I finally understood the truth. I realized why they had neglected me. I realized why they had pushed me into the shadows. It wasn't because they didn't think I was capable. It was because they knew I was. And they hated it. They had crippled Mariah by doing everything for her. By shielding her from every consequence. By inflating her ego until it was too big to fail. They had made her weak. But by ignoring me, by leaving me in the dark, by forcing me to figure everything out on my own, they had made me unstoppable. I was the titan they had accidentally built. And now, they were realizing just how powerful I had become. The silence broke. Not with applause. Not with congratulations. "Gabrielle," my father said, standing up. His voice was trembling. "We need to talk." The party died instantly. The guests didn't just leave. They fled. Sensing the radiation of a family meltdown, security ushered the last influencer out the door, leaving us alone in the cavernous silence of the penthouse. My father didn't look embarrassed anymore. He looked calculating. He walked over to the glass dining table, sat at the head, and gestured for me to sit. "Sit down. Gabrielle, we need to restructure the family portfolio." I sat. My mother, Lisa, was pacing, her heels clicking aggressively on the marble. Mariah was slumped on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, probably checking if the news of my wealth had leaked yet. "You think you did this alone?" My father began, his voice calm, reasonable, terrifying. "You think that money in your account is yours. But let's look at the data. Who gave you the time to study? Who gave you the independence to pursue these dusty interests of yours?" He leaned forward. "We did. By stepping back, by focusing our energy on Mariah, we gave you the greatest gift a parent can give, the gift of necessity. We forced you to be self-sufficient. We engineered your environment to produce resilience." I watched him closely and understood what was happening. He wasn't lying, he genuinely believed it. He had to. Admitting that I succeeded despite his neglect would destroy his ego. So he rewrote history. His cruelty became strategy. He wasn't a bad father. He was a visionary investor. My mother followed smoothly. "We shaped you," she said. If we had coddled you, you'd be weak. You owe us. We're your investors." Then my father slid an invoice across the table. 50%. $12 million. A management fee to cover my upbringing and the profits they claimed they sacrificed. My sister added her demand legal fees for federal charges she insisted she faced while building the family brand. It was delusion at its purest. They had turned my trauma into a service and were billing me for it. I said one word: no. When they exploded, calling me ungrateful, a thief, demanding I leave their penthouse, I reached under my chair and pulled out a red folder. Inside was a deed of trust, dated 6 months ago. The owner was a shell company in my name. "I bought this building," I said. "You've been living here rent-free." They didn't see generosity. They saw humiliation. My mother accused me of deception, of emotional fraud. Even charity had to be reframed as an attack. I told them the truth. It was cheaper to pay for their lifestyle than to listen to them. A silence tax. But it had expired. I slid across the final document. An eviction notice. 30 days. Fraud and criminal activity voided the lease. Security arrived minutes later, not as guests, as trespassers. They were escorted out, shouting threats, clutching borrowed status. Later, they tried to spin the story online. It failed. Receipts surfaced. Lawyers laughed. They downsized. I spent Christmas Eve alone in the penthouse, pouring the champagne down the sink. The silence felt clean. People think revenge is loud. It isn't. The greatest revenge is realizing you owned the house all along and finally changing the locks.